Financial collapse is rarely loud at the beginning. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with visible warning. In most cases, it begins quietly, with a decision made in isolation. One man, one judgment, one conclusion that goes unchallenged, and from that point, the structure begins to drift. Not because the man lacks intelligence, but because he lacks resistance. The Hebrew texts recognized this pattern early, long before formal accounting systems, long before regulatory frameworks. They introduced a requirement that appears at first unrelated to finance. A matter shall be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. It appears in legal contexts: disputes, accusations, testimony. At first glance, it seems designed to prevent injustice, to ensure that no single voice determines truth. But as the structure of the law expands, the principle begins to move beyond the courtroom. It becomes a pattern, a way of validating reality itself. In transactions, witnesses are present. In agreements, witnesses are named. In transfers of property, witnesses observe. Nothing of consequence is done entirely alone. This is not incidental, it is deliberate. To understand why, we must step away from the legal surface and examine the underlying assumption. The assumption is not that men are dishonest, it is that men are limited. A single perspective, no matter how informed, is incomplete. It contains blind spots, biases, gaps in judgment that are invisible to the one who holds them. When a decision is made in isolation, those blind spots remain unchallenged. They do not appear as errors. They appear as certainty. This is where the risk begins. The requirement for witnesses introduces friction into this process. Not opposition, not conflict, but presence. Another set of eyes, another frame of reference, another mind that observes, questions, and confirms. This changes the nature of the decision, even if the outcome remains the same. In the book of Deuteronomy, the instruction is repeated with precision. One witness shall not rise against a man. Only on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses shall a matter be established. The emphasis is not on the number, it is on the principle. One is insufficient. In financial terms, this has direct implications. A transaction validated by a single perspective is unstable, not necessarily incorrect, but untested. The introduction of additional witnesses does not guarantee correctness, but it increases the probability of it. It introduces verification. In ancient societies, where formal documentation was limited, witnesses served as living records. They remembered, they confirmed, they provided continuity. But their role was not only archival, it was preventative. The presence of witnesses alters behavior, subtly but consistently. A man making a decision alone operates within his own narrative. His reasoning remains internal, unspoken, unchallenged. But in the presence of others, even silent observers, that narrative becomes external. It must be articulated, explained, structured in a way that can be understood. This process often reveals weaknesses, inconsistencies, assumptions that do not hold under examination, not because the witnesses intervene directly, but because their presence requires clarity. This is where the economic logic begins to emerge, because many financial errors are not the result of missing information. They are the result of unexamined assumptions. A man believes an investment will succeed. He does not test that belief. He does not articulate its basis. He proceeds. If he were required to explain it to others, to present it clearly, to answer questions, the outcome might change. Not always, but often enough to matter. The Hebrew system institutionalizes this process. It does not leave verification to chance. It embeds it into action. Nothing important is done alone. This is not a restriction, it is a safeguard. There is also a second function, one that is less visible. Witnesses do not only observe the decision, they observe the commitment. In financial agreements, the terms are not only known to the participants, they are known to others. This creates accountability, not enforced through authority, but through awareness. A man is less likely to violate an agreement that others have seen, not because of fear, but because of structure. The decision exists outside of him. It is not private. This reduces a particular type of risk, the kind that emerges not from error, but from inconsistency. A decision made in isolation can be revised in isolation, quietly, without consequence. But a decision witnessed becomes fixed, not unchangeable, but anchored. This stability has economic value. It allows for trust, predictability, continuity of agreements. In modern systems, this function is often replaced by contracts, documents, legal enforcement. But the underlying principle remains the same: verification, visibility, shared knowledge. The misunderstanding arises when the concept of witnesses is reduced to formality, a procedural step, a requirement to be satisfied. But in the Hebrew framework, it is more than that. It is a discipline of decision-making. It assumes that isolation is inherently risky, not because individuals are incapable, but because they are incomplete. This challenges a common modern assumption: that independence is strength, that decisions made alone are more efficient, more decisive, more controlled. There is truth in this. Isolation removes friction, it speeds execution, but it also removes correction. The Hebrew system prioritizes accuracy over speed, stability over immediacy. This is not always comfortable. It introduces delay, requires explanation, invites scrutiny. But it reduces a specific category of failure, the kind that emerges from unchecked certainty. There is also a psychological effect, one that operates quietly. When a man knows that his decisions will be seen, evaluated, remembered, he approaches them differently. He prepares more carefully, thinks more clearly, considers consequences more thoroughly. Not because he is forced to, but because the structure invites it. Over time, this becomes internalized. Even when witnesses are not physically present, the pattern remains. The man anticipates scrutiny. He questions his own reasoning, tests his own assumptions. In this way, the external system becomes an internal discipline. This is perhaps the most significant effect, because it transforms behavior at its source. There is a passage in the book of Ruth that illustrates this in practice. A transaction is taking place, land is being transferred, rights are being negotiated. The parties do not complete the agreement privately. They go to the gate of the city. They gather witnesses. They state the terms openly. The transaction becomes public, not in the sense of spectacle, but in the sense of verification. Those present confirm what has occurred. They remember it. They validate it. The agreement becomes part of a shared reality, not an isolated event. This is the function of witnesses, to move a decision from private assumption to collective acknowledgement. In financial terms, this has a stabilizing effect. It reduces ambiguity, prevents disputes, ensures continuity. But more importantly, it improves the quality of the decision itself, because the act of making it in the presence of others requires a level of clarity that isolation does not. At this point, the central tension becomes visible, though it has been present from the beginning. Private decisions feel efficient, controlled, free from interference, but they carry a hidden cost. They are untested, unverified, unanchored, and over time, this leads to a particular pattern: repeated small errors, unnoticed inconsistencies, gradual drift, until the structure fails. The Hebrew principle intervenes before this point. It introduces a simple requirement: do not decide alone, not because you are incapable, but because you are human. This is not a limitation, it is an acknowledgement. That perspective is partial, that judgment benefits from structure, that decisions gain strength when they are seen. And so the system continues, quietly, without emphasis. 2 or 3 witnesses, not many, not excessive, just enough to introduce verification, enough to transform a private conclusion into a shared reality. And in that transformation, something subtle occurs. The decision becomes more stable, more deliberate, more aligned with consequence. not because it has changed entirely, but because it has been seen. And in the Hebrew framework, what is seen is less likely to collapse.